The grand concert hall was buzzing with activity as the orchestra prepared for the evening's performance. Musicians moved around carrying their instruments, tuning them carefully, and discussing the arrangements. The stage was perfectly lit, and the polished wooden floor reflected the warm glow of the lights above. It was a place of elegance and refinement, where every note mattered and every gesture was scrutinized. The audience would arrive in a few hours, but already the air was thick with anticipation. People took their positions, adjusted their sheet music, and warmed up their voices and instruments. In the midst of all this preparation, a humble janitor quietly moved through the hall. He carried a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other, methodically cleaning the floors and wiping down surfaces. He wore simple clothes, plain and functional, unlike the musicians in their formal attire. His presence was barely noticed by anyone. He moved with a sense of purpose, aware of his role and comfortable with it. He had worked in the hall for many years, and it was a place that felt like home, even if the people inside often ignored him. The janitor had learned to navigate the space without drawing attention to himself. He knew the best times to sweep, the corners that required extra care, and the moments when he could pause to listen to the music. Despite being in the background, he had always loved music. From a young age, he had been fascinated by the piano, the violin, and the sweeping harmonies of an orchestra. Music had been his escape, his secret world. While others saw him only as someone who cleaned floors, he had spent countless hours practicing and mastering the skills that brought music to life. The janitor had a gift that he rarely shared. He had played in small local gatherings and had amazed a few friends with his talent, but he had never sought fame or recognition. Life had taught him patience, humility, and the understanding that not everyone was ready to see beyond appearances. He knew that talent alone was not enough. Timing and opportunity mattered. That morning, as the orchestra began its rehearsal, the janitor moved along the side of the hall, sweeping under the chairs and around the stands. He paused occasionally to straighten a music sheet that had fallen or to adjust a stand that seemed crooked. Musicians occasionally glanced at him, some with indifference, others with mild annoyance, but he ignored it all. He had learned long ago that the world would judge him by his clothes and position, not by his abilities or character. The conductor, a tall man with sharp features and an air of authority, strode onto the stage. His presence commanded attention, and the musicians immediately fell silent, awaiting his instructions. He was known for his strictness and perfectionism, and his rehearsals were both demanding and intense. The janitor continued his work, aware that he was just a shadow in this world of light. Some of the musicians whispered among themselves, casting glances at the janitor as if to include him in their conversations, only to dismiss him moments later. One young violinist, carrying her instrument carefully, whispered to her neighbor, "He probably couldn't play a single note if his life depended on it." The comment drew a quiet chuckle, and a few others nodded in agreement. The janitor heard nothing. He was used to such remarks. He had long learned that words from those who did not know him had little meaning. Instead, he focused on the sound of the instrument's tuning, the rhythm of the stage crew moving chairs, and the distant hum of the audience gathering outside. He remembered the first time he had touched a piano. It had been in a small, dimly lit room at a community center. The keys felt cold under his fingers, but as soon as he pressed them, a warmth spread through him. From that moment on, he had devoted himself to music. He had learned to play by listening, by watching, and by endless practice. He had taught himself to read sheet music, to understand harmony, and to feel the rhythm of a piece as though it were a living being. Yet despite his talent, he had chosen to remain a janitor. Life had not offered him the opportunities that others had, and he had accepted it with grace. Music was his companion, and it mattered more than recognition or applause. As the rehearsal began, the orchestra played the opening pieces, filling the hall with rich, resonant sound. The janitor paused his work for a moment, letting the music wash over him. He could hear the subtle mistakes, the places where a note was slightly off or a rhythm was uneven. He imagined how he could adjust the tempo, how he could bring out the hidden beauty of each piece. These thoughts were private, tucked away in a world where only he existed with the music. Occasionally, a musician would glance at him and shake their head, perhaps wondering why he lingered near the stage. Some assumed he was eavesdropping, but in truth, he was merely present, observing, and appreciating. He had no desire to interfere or to draw attention to himself. He had learned the value of patience and timing. Life, he believed, had a way of revealing itself to those who waited. The rehearsal continued, and the janitor moved quietly around the hall, keeping it spotless. He noticed the small details: a chair slightly out of place, a music stand leaning too far forward, a stray paper on the floor. He corrected each one without a word, almost like a silent guardian of the space. Despite his simple appearance, there was a confidence in his movements, a sense of purpose that came from years of experience and dedication. The musicians began to take their breaks, gathering in small groups to discuss the pieces they were playing. The janitor moved to the side, filling his bucket with water and preparing to mop the floor. He overheard snippets of conversation complaints about difficult passages, praise for certain performers, and playful teasing. One group of violinists laughed softly, pointing toward the janitor and whispering, "Just look at him, pretending he belongs here." Their laughter was quiet, but the janitor heard it. He smiled to himself, not out of anger, but with a gentle amusement. He had heard such remarks many times, and they never affected him. In many ways, he understood them. People often judged what they could see, not what they could not. They assumed that appearance and status defined ability, and they rarely considered that someone hidden in plain sight might hold extraordinary skill. The janitor finished mopping the main floor and moved toward the piano at the edge of the stage. He paused, resting his hands on the polished wood, feeling its smooth surface. The piano was magnificent, a grand instrument that had been cared for meticulously. He imagined the sound it could produce in capable hands. In that quiet moment, he allowed himself to play in his mind, feeling the notes and imagining melodies. The music seemed to respond to him, even without his touch, as if it recognized his presence and talent. He did not play aloud. He simply allowed himself the private joy of imagining the sound. This was enough for him, a silent conversation with the instrument that no one else needed to hear. The conductor's voice suddenly cut through the air, calling the musicians to attention. The rehearsal was about to resume, and everyone hurried back to their positions. The janitor stepped back, returning to his work with the mop and bucket, blending into the background as he always did. No one noticed him, and that was exactly how he preferred it. He had learned to be invisible in order to survive and to keep his secret safe. Yet, beneath that calm exterior, there was a quiet strength, a readiness that only he knew existed. The janitor had spent years honing his craft, waiting for the right moment to reveal it, if that moment ever came. And deep down, he believed that one day life would provide the opportunity. For now, he continued his work, moving through the hall with grace and purpose, listening to the music, observing the orchestra, and dreaming of the day when he could finally let the world hear what he could do. The hours passed, and the rehearsal continued with intensity. The musicians played with focus, the conductor directed with precision, and the janitor remained a silent presence, moving from corner to corner, ensuring everything was clean and in order. Every now and then he paused, allowing himself to imagine playing the piano in front of this very orchestra, feeling the notes flow through him, the music filling the hall in a way that only he could imagine. It was a private dream, one that no one suspected existed behind his modest exterior. The day moved forward with its rhythm, each person in the hall absorbed in their own tasks and responsibilities. The janitor, though unnoticed, was very much a part of this rhythm. He understood the importance of every detail, every sound, every movement. While others focused on perfection and recognition, he focused on the essence of music itself, and that made all the difference. As the sun began to set and the warm glow of the stage lights became more pronounced, the janitor took a moment to stand still and look around. The hall was alive with energy and anticipation, but he felt a calmness that contrasted with the bustling activity. He knew that soon the real test would come, and he would have to decide whether to remain in the shadows or step forward into the light. For now, he remained patient, aware that his time would come. And as the first notes of the orchestra filled the hall once again, he moved quietly, almost like a ghost, keeping the space ready for the performance, ready for the world, and ready for the moment when he would finally reveal the talent that had been waiting quietly for years. The janitor moved through the hall quietly, his mop gliding over the polished floor as if it were part of the music itself. The orchestra was now deep into rehearsal, and the conductor's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. He was a man who believed that discipline and authority were the only ways to achieve perfection. Musicians respected him, though many feared him, and he took great pride in his ability to control every detail of the performance. From his position on the podium, he scanned the hall, watching as the musicians played, his baton flicking in precise motions. He did not notice the janitor at first, which suited the janitor perfectly. He liked to remain invisible, moving among the people without drawing attention, quietly making the hall perfect for others to perform. The conductor paused and frowned. Something was off with the piano. The janitor had noticed it earlier. One of the pedals squeaked slightly, and the lid had a small scratch that disrupted the reflection of light. These things did not matter to most, but the janitor knew the piano intimately. He had spent hours caring for it, keeping it polished and ready. As he walked past it, he adjusted the bench, making sure it was centered, aligned with the keys. The conductor noticed him then, and his sharp eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" he barked. The janitor paused, holding the mop. "Just cleaning, sir," he said softly, his voice calm and respectful. The conductor smirked, a laugh escaping his lips. "Cleaning? Here? Don't waste your time. You're just a janitor." His tone was mocking, filled with disbelief that someone so lowly could even be near the instrument. The musicians around chuckled quietly, glancing at the janitor as if to confirm the conductor's assessment. Some whispered to each other, making jokes about his appearance and position. The janitor did not react outwardly. He simply nodded and continued his work, as he always did, understanding that ridicule was part of the world he lived in. But inside, a quiet fire burned. The words stung, but they also reminded him of all the hours he had spent practicing alone, the countless nights he had devoted to music when no one believed in him. He remembered the first time he had played in front of someone who doubted him, and how their eyes had widened in surprise. That memory gave him strength now. The conductor, sensing amusement in the room, stepped closer. He raised his hand as if to emphasize the absurdity of the situation. "Do you really think you can play this piano?" he said with a laugh that echoed through the hall. "Do you know even one scale?" The musicians exchanged glances, stifling laughter. The janitor's heart remained steady. He had heard this kind of doubt before, many times in his life. People often underestimated him, seeing only the exterior, the uniform, the mop in his hand, but not the talent that lay hidden beneath. He did not argue or defend himself. Words were meaningless to him compared to action. He waited, patient, knowing that one day his abilities would speak louder than any insult. The conductor, amused by his silence, waved him away. "Fine, keep cleaning, but don't even think about touching the piano. Leave the music to those who can handle it." The janitor smiled faintly, continuing his work, moving around the chairs, adjusting music stands, and ensuring the floor was spotless. He noticed the subtle changes in the room, the way the musicians responded to each other, the slight tension in the air, and the way the conductor moved, his energy shifting as he tried to maintain control. He observed everything quietly, learning from it all. During the break, a few musicians approached the janitor, whispering and pointing at him. They were curious, intrigued by the contrast between his simple appearance and the grace with which he moved around the hall. "Do you really play piano?" one asked, her voice low. "I've never seen you play." The janitor shook his head gently, smiling. "I play when I can," he said softly, avoiding further explanation. They looked at him, puzzled and slightly skeptical, but the curiosity lingered. The conductor returned to the podium, calling the orchestra back to attention. He was ready to continue rehearsing, confident that the janitor had no part in the music. The janitor stepped back, allowing the musicians to focus, and watched silently. He noticed small imperfections in their playing, places where the harmony could be richer, the tempo steadier, the transition smoother. In his mind, he imagined how he would approach the piece, how he would guide each note to perfection, but he kept it all to himself. Patience, he reminded himself, was the key. Suddenly, a mishap occurred. One of the pianists, the lead performer, stumbled over a complex passage and winced, rubbing her hand. She had strained a finger and could not continue. A hush fell over the hall. The conductor's face turned pale. This was the lead pianist, the most experienced musician in the orchestra. Without her, the performance would be compromised. Musicians whispered anxiously to each other, unsure of what to do. The conductor's expression shifted from confidence to concern. He needed a solution, and he needed it fast. The janitor remained still, watching the scene unfold. He understood the importance of the moment. Life had given him a chance, though he did not yet know how it would come. The conductor looked around the hall, desperation in his eyes. He needed someone, anyone, to step in and play. His gaze fell on the janitor, still holding his mop. He raised an eyebrow, incredulous. "You?" he said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. The musicians laughed softly, unable to take the suggestion seriously. The janitor's heart remained calm. He stepped forward, his voice steady and confident. "I can play," he said simply. The conductor stared at him, mouth slightly open. "You play piano?" he said incredulously. The room was silent for a moment, the laughter of the musicians dying away as curiosity and disbelief took its place. Some of them looked at the janitor with newfound attention, wondering if he was serious or simply joking. The janitor nodded, his eyes calm and determined. "Yes," he said. The conductor's brow furrowed. He looked at the janitor up and down, seeing the mop, the simple clothes, and the quiet demeanor, and he almost laughed again. "Do you know what you're saying?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Do you understand the complexity of this piece?" The janitor's gaze never wavered. "I do," he replied. The conductor, frustrated and unsure, hesitated. He had no other options, and the rehearsal could not continue without someone at the piano. Slowly, he gestured toward the instrument. "Fine," he said, his voice tinged with reluctance. "Sit down, play, but don't embarrass yourself for me." The janitor nodded politely, moving to the piano. Musicians and staff watched, unsure of what to expect. Some were still skeptical, while others were curious. The janitor adjusted the bench, placed his hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. The hall was quiet, every eye fixed on him. The conductor's smirk faded slightly, replaced by an uneasy anticipation. The janitor closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the piano beneath his fingers, letting the wood and strings speak to him. He remembered the countless hours he had spent practicing, the nights of solitude, and the joy of discovering the power of music. And then he began to play. At first, it was soft, tentative, testing the space, exploring the sound. But soon, the notes grew richer, more confident, and the music began to flow effortlessly. The janitor's fingers moved with a grace that seemed impossible given the laughter and doubt that had filled the room just moments before. The melody was beautiful, precise, and full of emotion. Musicians stopped mid-rehearsal, captivated by the sound. Even the conductor, who had laughed and mocked just minutes ago, froze. He could not believe what he was hearing. The janitor played complex passages with ease, bringing out harmonies and nuances that even experienced performers might miss. The music filled the hall, echoing through the walls and resonating in the hearts of everyone present. The conductor's eyes widened in shock. He had underestimated the janitor completely, judging him by his appearance and role rather than his talent. The janitor's calm demeanor and mastery of the piano left everyone speechless. The musicians watched in awe, some exchanging glances, realizing that they had been wrong to judge him. The janitor played not for applause or recognition, but because music was his life, his voice, and his truth. It was the most natural thing in the world for him to sit at the piano and create something extraordinary. The room was completely silent except for the music, and for the first time that day, the janitor felt fully seen not as a janitor, but as an artist, a musician, and a master of his craft. The conductor, unable to hide his astonishment, lowered his baton. He had no words, only the sound of the janitor's music filling the hall. This was a moment that would change everything, a moment when the world had to acknowledge that talent cannot be measured by appearance, and that sometimes the greatest surprises come from the most unlikely places. The moment the janitor sat down at the piano, a quiet tension filled the hall. Musicians watched, holding their instruments in midair, unsure if they were about to witness disaster or something incredible. The conductor, still doubtful, shifted uneasily on the podium. His eyes followed every subtle movement of the janitor's hands, his fingers hovering over the keys, seemingly hesitant yet confident. The janitor took a deep breath, feeling the cool, polished wood beneath his palms. This piano had a story. It had witnessed years of practice, performances, applause, and silence. He felt connected to it immediately, as if the instrument recognized him. Slowly, he pressed a single key, letting the note ring out. It was soft, deliberate, perfect in its tone. The room was silent, every ear tuned to the sound. The conductor raised an eyebrow, curiosity mixing with disbelief. The janitor closed his eyes and allowed his memory and experience to guide him. He didn't think about the audience or the conductor's previous mockery. Music flowed through him naturally, as if it was a part of his own breath. The first few notes were simple, almost like an introduction, but they carried a depth that made people sit forward and listen. Then the melody grew, more complex, more expressive. The janitor's fingers danced across the keys with precision, yet each note had an emotional weight that touched everyone in the room. The conductor leaned forward slightly, unable to hide the surprise that spread across his face. This was no ordinary janitor. This was a musician of extraordinary skill. The musicians, who had moments before doubted his presence, now listened in awe. The piece demanded attention, and the janitor played as if he had been born for this moment. He moved through the music with the confidence of someone who had practiced for decades. Yet there was a freshness, a spark of spontaneity that made each note alive. It was not just technical skill. It was storytelling, emotion, and understanding combined in perfect harmony. Each phrase was precise, yet flowing. The crescendo built naturally, rising and falling in waves that carried the audience along. Some of the younger musicians exchanged astonished glances, realizing that talent often hid in the most unexpected places. The janitor's performance was not about proving others wrong. It was about expressing something deep and true. The conductor, still in disbelief, watched as the hall seemed to transform. The sound of the piano filled every corner, blending seamlessly with the subtle harmony that had emerged from the other musicians, who had instinctively begun playing along. They did not speak. They did not question. They simply followed, guided by the music and the unmistakable mastery of the janitor at the piano. The janitor noticed every detail, the soft hum of the strings, the subtle echo of the wood, the delicate balance of the air in the hall. He adjusted his touch accordingly, making the piano speak in a way that resonated with everyone present. It was as if he had known this hall and this instrument for his entire life. As the music continued, a subtle change came over the conductor. His skepticism slowly melted into awe. He had underestimated the janitor completely, judging him by his appearance and role rather than his talent. He had mocked him, laughed at him, and yet here was undeniable proof that true skill cannot be hidden. The hall, which had moments ago been filled with quiet tension, was now vibrating with energy. The musicians played with a newfound freedom, inspired by the janitor's command of the music. Their instruments blended in harmony, responding to the subtle guidance of the melody, creating a sound that was more than the sum of its parts. The janitor's face remained calm, almost serene, yet there was a quiet intensity in his eyes. He was fully immersed in the music, every note deliberate, every chord purposeful. He felt the flow of the performance, the unspoken connection between the musicians and himself, and the energy of the hall. Time seemed to stretch, the minutes passing unnoticed as the janitor played on. The conductor had forgotten to continue directing. He simply watched, mesmerized by what he was witnessing. The young musicians who had laughed moments ago now hung on every note, their initial skepticism replaced with admiration. The janitor moved through each section of the piece effortlessly, transitioning from slow, contemplative passages to powerful, energetic movements. His fingers never faltered, and yet the performance never felt mechanical. Every key was touched with emotion, every pause intentional. There was a story in the music, one that spoke of struggle, patience, and hidden potential. Some of the audience members, who had been present for rehearsals, felt tears prick at their eyes. The beauty of the performance was overwhelming, and yet it was so natural, so effortless, that it seemed almost otherworldly. Even the conductor, a man accustomed to excellence, felt a stirring in his chest, a mixture of humility and awe. As the piece approached its climax, the janitor's playing grew more intricate, more expressive. He incorporated subtle nuances, small embellishments that elevated the music to something extraordinary. The hall seemed to vibrate with life, the sound filling every corner, touching every listener in a profound way. Musicians followed his lead instinctively, their instruments blending seamlessly, creating a rich tapestry of sound. The conductor could not move, could not speak. All he could do was watch, his earlier arrogance replaced with a deep respect and admiration. The janitor's fingers flew over the keys, yet every movement was controlled, precise, and meaningful. The crescendo reached its peak, a powerful surge of emotion and technical brilliance. And then, as if guided by instinct, the janitor began to bring the piece to a gentle close. The final notes lingered in the air, delicate and perfect, echoing softly through the hall. Silence followed. Absolute, stunned silence. The conductor's mouth opened, but no words came out. Musicians lowered their instruments slowly, as if not wanting to break the spell. The janitor sat back slightly, his hands resting lightly on the keys. He did not look triumphant or boastful. He was calm, content, and quietly proud of what he had shared. The room remained silent for a few moments longer, as if the music itself had settled into the walls and floor. And then, slowly, applause began. It started as a whisper, a soft acknowledgement from a few musicians, and then it grew louder until the entire hall was clapping, cheering, and rising to their feet. The conductor's hands dropped to his sides, his face a mixture of amazement and humility. He approached the janitor, hesitating slightly, unsure of how to express what he was feeling. Words failed him. The janitor, still calm, gave a small nod, acknowledging the applause without letting it overwhelm him. In that moment, everyone in the hall understood that they had witnessed something rare, extraordinary, and beautiful. The janitor had transformed the space, elevated the performance, and reminded everyone present that talent cannot be judged by appearance. The music had spoken for him, conveying his years of dedication, patience, and passion. Musicians who had once doubted him now looked at him with respect, admiration, and perhaps a hint of envy. They realized that the world often overlooks hidden talent, and that true skill can appear in the most unexpected places. The conductor, still catching his breath, finally found his voice. He stepped forward, bowing his head slightly to the janitor, an unspoken acknowledgement of his mistake and newfound respect. The janitor nodded once more, returning to his humble demeanor. He had not come to prove others wrong. He had come to play, to share the music that lived inside him, and to honor the instrument and the space that had given him so much. As the applause continued, the janitor stood, straightened his simple clothes, and quietly moved away from the piano. The musicians and conductor continued to applaud, their admiration clear, but the janitor remained grounded. He had shared his gift, and that was enough. Life had given him a moment to reveal his true self, and he had done so with grace and humility. The hall, once filled with skepticism and doubt, now resonated with the echoes of his performance and the silent acknowledgement of his extraordinary talent. And though he returned to his simple duties shortly after, everyone present knew that they had witnessed something unforgettable, a performance that would remain in their hearts for years to come. In that moment, the janitor was no longer just a janitor. He was an artist, a musician, and a reminder to the world that appearances can be deceiving, and true talent cannot be hidden forever. After the first breathtaking notes had filled the hall, and the initial applause had died down, the janitor remained at the piano, his hands resting lightly on the keys, feeling the lingering vibrations of his music. The orchestra and the conductor stood in stunned silence, each trying to process what they had just witnessed. The hall itself seemed different now, as if the music had left an invisible mark that could be felt in the air and the wood and the seats. The janitor had revealed a side of himself that no one had expected, and it was clear to everyone present that his talent was not simply good. It was extraordinary. The conductor slowly raised his hand, signaling the orchestra to join in once again, but this time something had changed. The janitor's playing had set a new standard, one that demanded attention, precision, and passion. As the musicians lifted their instruments to continue, they found themselves inspired rather than intimidated. Even the ones who had doubted him were now eager to follow his lead, curious to see how the music would unfold under his subtle guidance. The janitor began to play again, this time moving into a more intricate section of the composition. The notes flowed effortlessly, yet every sound was deliberate and meaningful. He navigated the complex passages with ease, bringing out melodies that the orchestra had previously struggled to highlight. Each phrase was woven with emotion and technical mastery, commanding the attention of every listener. The conductor, still standing at his podium, could not help but be drawn into the performance. He was used to directing, to controlling every aspect of a rehearsal, but here he realized that he was witnessing something beyond his own understanding. The janitor's skill had shifted the balance in the hall. It was no longer about authority or status. It was about music, pure and true, and the janitor was its master. The musicians adjusted their playing, subtly following the cues of the janitor's hands. The harmony between the piano and the other instruments became seamless, the sound rich and layered. The hall seemed to vibrate with life, each note resonating with clarity and emotion. Some of the younger musicians could barely believe their eyes. They had seen the janitor only as a figure who swept floors and tidied up the hall, someone they had quietly underestimated. And yet here he was, guiding the music with a skill that surpassed even the most seasoned performers among them. The janitor did not acknowledge their astonishment. He played as if in conversation with the piano, letting the instrument speak the words that he had carried in his heart for so long. The conductor's own playing had faded into a quiet background as he watched, trying to learn, to understand, and to absorb the lessons unfolding before him. He realized that he had been wrong, that his assumptions had clouded his perception, and that true mastery cannot be judged by titles, uniforms, or appearances. With each passing moment, the janitor's confidence grew, but it was not arrogance. There was a calm certainty in his movements, a quiet joy in expressing something deeply personal. The music flowed as naturally from him as breathing, and it carried with it his sense of story, of struggle and triumph, of patience and perseverance. The orchestra responded instinctively, as if they had been waiting for this direction all along. The melody rose and fell, soft and gentle one moment, strong and powerful the next. Each note seemed to hold a hidden meaning, a subtle message that resonated with everyone present. The musicians played with renewed energy, their instruments blending perfectly with the piano. The conductor, unable to contain himself, moved slightly closer, studying every movement of the janitor's hands. He watched the subtle cues, the slight changes in pressure, the way he emphasized certain notes over others. It was as if the janitor were speaking through the piano, conveying ideas and emotions that transcended words. A few musicians who had laughed earlier, mocking him, now had tears in their eyes. They had underestimated someone they thought they knew, and the realization was both humbling and inspiring. The janitor's playing reminded them that true talent is not always visible, that it can exist in quiet, overlooked corners, waiting for the right moment to shine. The tempo began to shift, moving from a gentle rhythm to a more dynamic, dramatic pace. The janitor adjusted seamlessly, guiding the orchestra with subtle gestures and the natural flow of his music. The room seemed to expand, the sound enveloping every listener, creating a sense of being part of something larger than themselves. Even the air felt charged, as though the music had transformed the very atmosphere. The conductor, who had once been mocking, now felt a mixture of admiration, humility, and awe. He realized that control was not always about authority. Sometimes it was about listening, observing, and allowing talent to lead. He studied the janitor carefully, noting the way he handled complexity, the ease with which he transitioned between passages, and the emotion he infused into every note. The janitor moved through a series of challenging chords, each one executed flawlessly. His fingers flew over the keys, yet every movement was precise and purposeful. The hall seemed to vibrate with energy, the resonance of the piano echoing through the walls and into the hearts of those present. The musicians responded instinctively, their instruments blending in perfect harmony, creating a rich, full sound that seemed almost magical. The janitor's expression remained calm, almost serene, yet there was an intensity in his eyes that reflected his deep connection to the music. He was not playing for recognition or praise. He was playing because it was an expression of himself, a voice that could not be silenced. The music built to a crescendo, powerful and emotional, filling the hall with a sound that was both commanding and beautiful. The conductor watched, unable to move, caught in the spell of the performance. He had been wrong, utterly wrong, and he knew it. The janitor's talent had surpassed his expectations, and he could only admire the grace, skill, and emotion that flowed from the piano. As the piece began to slow, moving into a softer, more reflective section. The janitor allowed himself a brief pause, a gentle breath between phrases. The notes became tender, delicate, each one carrying a subtle weight, a whisper of the years of practice, dedication, and patience that had led to this moment. The musicians followed, their playing adjusting to match the tone and pace, creating a unified sound that was both intimate and grand. The conductor felt a swell of emotion, realizing that he was witnessing not just skill but heart. The janitor's performance was not mechanical or rehearsed. It was alive, full of feeling, and it had transformed the hall into a space where music was more than sound. It was an experience, a story told through notes and rhythm. Every listener was captivated, caught in the spell of the performance. Even those who had been indifferent or dismissive now found themselves leaning forward, listening intently, moved by the beauty of what they were hearing. The janitor's playing continued, each note deliberate, each chord carefully chosen. He navigated complex passages with apparent ease, bringing out subtleties that others might have missed. There was a balance between technical mastery and emotional depth that left everyone in awe. The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence between notes as powerful as the music itself. The musicians, inspired by the janitor's skill, found a new confidence in their own playing. They had been led by someone they had once underestimated, and the experience was humbling and enlightening. They adjusted their tempo and tone, following the natural flow set by the janitor, creating a harmonious sound that filled the hall with a rich tapestry of music. The conductor, now fully engaged, began to understand that this was a lesson in humility and the true nature of talent. Control and authority were not enough. One had to recognize and respect skill when it appeared, no matter how unexpected the source. The janitor's performance continued seamlessly, moving through variations, transitions, and dynamic shifts with grace and precision. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful, every phrase full of emotion. The hall seemed to vibrate with life, the sound resonating through the walls, the floor, and the listeners' hearts. Time seemed to blur as the music carried everyone along, taking them on a journey that was both personal and universal. As the piece neared its conclusion, the janitor's playing grew softer, more reflective, yet no less powerful. The final chords lingered in the air, delicate and precise, echoing long after the last note was played. Silence followed, profound and complete, before the hall erupted into applause. The conductor, the musicians, and all who were present rose to their feet, cheering and clapping, moved by the beauty and skill they had witnessed. The janitor, calm and humble, nodded in acknowledgment, quietly satisfied. He had shared his gift, and it had been received with the respect and admiration it deserved. In that moment, the hall was filled not only with music, but with recognition, awe, and the understanding that true talent can be hidden in the most unexpected places. The janitor had transformed not just the performance, but the hearts and minds of everyone present, leaving a lasting impression that would be remembered for years to come. The final applause of the performance echoed through the hall, yet the janitor remained seated at the piano, his hands resting lightly on the keys. The room was filled with a mix of astonishment, admiration, and an almost reverent silence that lingered after such an extraordinary performance. Musicians who had been skeptical or dismissive just moments ago now stared in awe, realizing that their assumptions had been completely wrong. The janitor's presence had transformed the entire space, and it was impossible to ignore the profound impact of his playing. The conductor, who had laughed at him earlier, now approached the piano with a mix of hesitation and respect. He was a man who had been accustomed to control, accustomed to being the authority, and accustomed to having his judgments accepted without question. And yet, here was someone he had dismissed, someone who had quietly worked in the background, revealing a talent that far surpassed his own expectations. His voice was soft, almost uncertain, as he finally spoke. "I owe you an apology," he said, the weight of his words reflecting genuine humility. The janitor merely nodded, acknowledging the sentiment without needing to dwell on it. There was no bitterness in his demeanor, no desire for revenge. He had played for the music, and the acknowledgment was enough. The musicians began to gather around, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others offering quiet praise. They had witnessed a transformation, not only in the music, but in their understanding of talent, humility, and the human spirit. One violinist approached, her eyes wide with amazement. "I can't believe it," she said softly. "All this time, we never knew." The janitor smiled faintly, a gentle expression that carried years of patience and understanding. "Sometimes the best things are hidden where no one looks," he said quietly. The hall, once filled with tension and skepticism, was now alive with a new energy. The musicians played a few more notes under the janitor's subtle guidance, each one blending perfectly, inspired by his skill and presence. The conductor stood back, observing, learning, and absorbing the lesson that talent cannot be measured by appearances or social status. Word of the janitor's performance spread quickly. As the rehearsal ended and the audience began to leave, whispers of amazement circulated. People who had been present shared stories of the unexpected talent, praising the humility and skill of the man who had once been overlooked. The janitor, though quietly proud, returned to his duties, continuing to maintain the hall as he always had. He moved with grace, mopping the floors, adjusting chairs, and ensuring that the space remained perfect. And yet there was a difference in the way people now looked at him. Respect had replaced doubt, admiration had replaced mockery, and curiosity had replaced indifference. The conductor, still processing what had occurred, took a moment to reflect. He had been reminded of a valuable lesson, that assumptions can blind us, and that true talent can exist in the most unexpected places. He had witnessed firsthand the power of dedication, patience, and humility, and he knew that his understanding of music, leadership, and life had deepened. The janitor's story did not end with that performance. Invitations began to arrive, offering him opportunities to share his gift with a wider audience. He was asked to perform at other halls, collaborate with musicians, and even take on teaching roles. Yet, despite the recognition and praise, he remained grounded. His love for music had never been about fame. It had always been about expression, passion, and connection. Each performance, each opportunity, was approached with the same humility and dedication that had characterized his work from the beginning. He understood that music was more than notes on a page. It was a language, a bridge between people, and a reflection of the human experience. As he moved through these new experiences, he continued to inspire others, not just with his technical skill, but with his humility, patience, and unwavering dedication. Musicians and audiences alike were moved not only by his performances, but by the quiet strength of his character, the depth of his understanding, and the sincerity of his expression. Over time, the janitor became a symbol of hidden talent and perseverance. His story was shared widely, reminding people that appearances can be deceiving, that greatness can exist in unexpected places, and that true skill and dedication are revealed not by status, but by action. People began to approach him for advice, mentorship, and guidance. He shared what he had learned over the years, not only about music, but about patience, humility, and the importance of believing in oneself. His influence extended beyond the concert hall, touching lives in ways he had never anticipated. The conductor, once skeptical and mocking, became one of his greatest supporters, often speaking about the lesson he had learned from the janitor's performance. He praised the janitor's skill, humility, and dedication, using the story as an example for young musicians and students. The janitor continued to perform, teach, and inspire, always grounded in the same values that had guided him from the beginning. Each note he played was filled with intention, each performance a reflection of years of quiet practice, patience, and love for music. And through it all, he remained humble, never allowing recognition or praise to cloud his focus or change the essence of who he was. His story became a legend within the music community, a testament to the power of hidden talent, perseverance, and the human spirit. People remembered not just the performance, but the man who had once been invisible, who had worked quietly in the background, and who had revealed a brilliance that could not be ignored. The janitor's influence continued to grow, inspiring not only musicians, but people in all walks of life. His story reminded them to look beyond appearances, to recognize potential where it might be hidden, and to believe in the power of patience, practice, and dedication. As the years passed, the janitor's legacy was not only in the music he played, but in the lives he touched, the lessons he taught, and the inspiration he provided. He remained a symbol of humility, excellence, and the extraordinary potential that exists within every individual, waiting for the moment to be revealed. Even in the quiet moments, when he returned to sweeping floors or polishing the hall, he carried the knowledge that his life had changed, not because he sought recognition, but because he had embraced his gift, shared it with the world, and allowed it to shine in its own time. And so, the janitor's story continued, a testament to the beauty of hidden talent, the power of humility, and the enduring impact of sharing one's gift with sincerity, courage, and heart. His journey inspired countless others to look beyond judgment, to believe in their own abilities, and to trust that the right moment would come for their own talents to be revealed. After the story of the janitor's extraordinary performance spread, the world began to take notice. News outlets shared the tale of the humble man who had transformed a rehearsal into a masterpiece, and soon invitations arrived from concert halls and music schools, requesting him to perform and teach. Despite the recognition, the janitor remained grounded. Fame was never his goal. Music was his purpose, and he treated every opportunity with the same humility and devotion that had guided him for years. He continued to work in the hall, sweeping floors and polishing instruments, but now he did so with a sense of quiet pride. Every movement, every gesture, carried the understanding that his life had changed not because of external approval, but because he had embraced his gift and shared it. The conductor, once skeptical and mocking, became one of his closest collaborators. They spent hours together, refining pieces, discussing interpretations, and exploring new musical arrangements. The conductor's respect for the janitor deepened with each session, not just because of his technical brilliance, but because of the humility and humanity he brought to every interaction. Musicians who had once overlooked him now sought his guidance. Young violinists, cellists, and pianists came to him, eager to learn from someone who had mastered his craft, not through ambition, but through dedication, patience, and love for music. He encouraged them to practice diligently, to listen carefully, and to remain humble in the face of both talent and recognition. Performances began to change in character as well. The janitor, now occasionally taking the stage at major concerts, played with the same effortless brilliance he had demonstrated during that first rehearsal. His presence inspired not only musicians but audiences. Each note he played carried a story, a reflection of years of silent dedication, and an understanding that music was not merely entertainment, but a profound expression of the human experience. Every performance seemed to draw people closer, bridging gaps between cultures, backgrounds, and expectations. The hall that had once been his quiet workplace now echoed with applause and admiration, yet he moved through it with the same modesty as before. He still arrived early, ensuring every detail was perfect, whether it was the arrangement of chairs, the cleanliness of the floor, or the condition of the instruments. In his mind, these small actions were as important as the music itself. They showed respect for the art and the people who would create it alongside him. As he traveled to other venues, he remained approachable, kind, and patient. People marveled not only at his talent, but at the warmth and humanity he displayed. He spoke gently to young musicians, sharing lessons learned not only in technique, but in life. He reminded them that skill alone was not enough. Patience, humility, and a love for the work itself were equally important. Audiences responded with admiration, not just for his playing, but for the authenticity he brought to every interaction. Invitations came from music schools, festivals, and orchestras around the world. Each opportunity was carefully considered, but he remained true to his principles. He never sought fame or wealth. He sought only to share music, to inspire, and to honor the gift he had been given. In every city, in every hall, the effect was the same. People were captivated not only by the beauty of his playing, but by the humility and sincerity that shone through every note. The conductor continued to work closely with him, learning as much from the janitor's perspective on music as he did from formal study. They shared ideas, experimented with new compositions, and explored the emotional depth of each piece. Their partnership became a story in itself, a symbol of respect, collaboration, and the unexpected connections that talent and humility could create. Young musicians who had once dismissed him began to see the importance of patience and persistence. They realized that talent could be hidden in the most unassuming places, and that true mastery required years of dedication away from the eyes. Spotlight. The janitor's story became a lesson not only in music, but in life, inspiring people to value effort, resilience, and the quiet cultivation of skill. Over time, he continued to perform, teach, and inspire, always returning to his roots. The hall where he had once been invisible became a place of pilgrimage for musicians and audiences alike, eager to witness the man whose talent had transformed both the rehearsal and the lives of those around him. Despite his growing reputation, he remained grounded, preferring the simplicity and authenticity of his work over the allure of fame. Each performance was an opportunity to share his story not through words, but through the universal language of music. He touched the hearts of those who listened, reminding them that greatness can appear in the most unexpected places, and that true achievement is often measured by dedication, integrity, and the willingness to share one's gift without expectation of reward. The janitor's journey continued as a testament to perseverance and humility. He became a mentor, a guide, and a source of inspiration for countless musicians and listeners. His life illustrated the transformative power of talent combined with patience and sincerity. Even when recognition and applause followed him, he never allowed them to overshadow the essence of who he was, a dedicated musician and a humble human being. In quiet moments, when the halls were empty and the instruments rested, he returned to sweeping the floors and polishing the piano. These acts reminded him of where he had begun, grounding him in simplicity and reinforcing the values that had shaped his life. He understood that music was not about accolades, but about connection, expression, and the sharing of a gift that transcended words. People continued to speak of the janitor who had astonished the conductor and the orchestra. They spoke of his skill, his humility, and his quiet strength. But those who knew him best understood that his true legacy lay not in applause or recognition, but in the countless moments of dedication, the years of silent practice, and the unwavering commitment to his art. His life had become a story of inspiration, teaching others to look beyond appearances, to value hard work and patience, and to believe that true talent cannot remain hidden forever. And so the janitor continued, quietly moving through halls, playing music that touched the soul, mentoring young musicians, and reminding the world that greatness often appears where it is least expected. He remained a humble figure, yet his presence inspired respect, admiration, and awe. His journey demonstrated that dedication, humility, and love for one's craft could transform not only a single rehearsal, but the hearts and minds of everyone who experienced it. Through his music and example, he left a lasting impact on the world, proving that true talent is not measured by status or appearance, but by the depth of one's dedication, the sincerity of one's heart, and the courage to share one's gift with the world.